Hi, I'm Cicely and welcome to my channel. I am currently a 2L at Stanford Law School, and this channel is generally about things involving being a law student, kind of career paths and things like that, and my experiences. A lot of this will be purely anecdotal, but it'll at least be a data point. So we are going to jump right into the topic of the day, and that topic is 1L internships. This will be pretty skewed into kind of the experience of what you might be able to expect at a top law school. So I'm thinking T14, T20, and that's just because there are some pretty set pipelines in these kinds of institutions, and it's from my experience, and that is the experience that I'm living right now. So I am going to walk through some of the more common types of summer jobs, internships, whatever you want to call them, and then also a couple of alternatives, not all of them, but some of like the main alternatives that people will do, and then also some things to consider like pay, and then how the internship that you do the summer after your 1L year will affect kind of your process moving forward, especially for OCI. And then I will walk through some of the approaches that you can take in your search for a 1L internship, including my own, the timeline for kind of looking for a 1L internship, which I'm putting this video out right now because the time is kind of at the beginning right now. And then just a few tips from my own experience and just what I've heard from talking to people and their experiences, and some final thoughts. So first up, when it comes to types of 1L summer internships, we have Big Law. So Big Law is kind of the end result for a lot of people going to top law schools, at least for the first few years after leaving law school. And it's also an option as you go into, your first summer. The thing about Big Law is that as standard, I'm not going to go with easy because easy is not exactly true at any point, but as standard as it is to do for your 2L summer and then to enter into a big law practice after graduation, it's actually pretty difficult to get as a 1L. And there are programs for women and minorities and kind of like other less represented groups in big law. And then also, if you have connections, it can be easier. But even for people like that, it can be pretty difficult to get as a 1L for your 1L summer. There is generally a pretty set hiring process for it, pretty standard. In late November or early December, they'll put apps out, and most of the time those apps will be due either kind of like the beginning of January or by the end of January. The next area for summer internships for 1L would be something kind of PI or public interest related, like government or kind of agency work, and that can be anything from like the State Department or the DOJ or the Hill in DC, and that can also be local and state government, so it's really wide. This is actually the route I ended up on for my summer. Government can be super varied. There are some that are more prestigious than others and therefore are more difficult to get, but a lot of people end up in government work at some level after 1L because they end up being unpaid and can kind of take a wider group of students for the summer. Barring some kind of specific areas, generally I think state and local government internships can be a little bit easier to get than federal, and I think some of that is just like a smaller pool of people because usually it's people from those regions that are the most interested in applying for them. One thing to consider for government and kind of agency work is that they are a lot less likely to hire you after you graduate, and so it's not so much as like a specific pipeline to where you will go back as a 2L and then get hired as a 3L to work for them after graduation. But some of them do, like the Fed and the SEC, I think, and the DOJ and some others do have an honors program that do hire during 3L year for right after graduation, but they are really competitive and they don't actually have them all, or all of them don't have openings every year. Kind of an offshoot to that kind of government agency work is clerking, and that can be for a judge or a court or something. And I know I've seen kind of like things passed around for like more international ones, and that kind of have like standard relationships where a student might get to go every year. And then there's also you're not going to go to one of the big courts as a 1L, but you can kind of do more like state courts and things like that. This was not my thing, so it's probably the one area that I'm going to talk about that I didn't apply for anything for. And so I'm a little bit fuzzy on it, but it is kind of a government offshoot for the summer. Another really big area for 1L summer internships are for kind of nonprofit public interest organizations. Sometimes this can be for just like a smaller nonprofit, something that you were involved with before, someone that's just like always looking for people to work for them over the summer to kind of get the workload off of them a bit. And it could be something like you worked with a pro bono project during the school year, or your school partners with them for pro bono and clinic work, and so they have openings for the summer. That's one route. And then with that kind of work where there's like pro bono relationships, it can actually be really good if you're wanting to do firm work the next summer or in your future, because a lot of firms also have relationships for their pro bono work with organizations like that. With nonprofits, there are also the larger, prestigious, more established nonprofits that we all know and love, and things like the ACLU are still pretty competitive, and I would say just as competitive as Big Law, if not more so. I definitely, if you're wanting to do just things like that, would not recommend putting all of your eggs in one basket. The thing about nonprofits or kind of like other non-government PI work is that they are also unlikely to hire you straight from law school, and that's fine. But it's like something to know going in is that you're probably still going to have to do something else and work your way back to them if that's where you want to end up long term. That being said, it's always good to build relationships if that's where you want to end up in the end. And if you are going kind of the PI route, if you're going to want to do kind of like a fellowship or something after law school, that might be a good way to kind of solidify your interest of area, start building a plan, because a lot of those fellowships require kind of a set, process that you're going to follow, something that you want to accomplish and like a plan for it. And in some cases, kind of like a proven track record. And so having kind of that PI focus and building those relationships early on can be helpful for setting yourself up for those kind of fellowships and opportunities. The final main area that I want to go into is doing an in-house summer. And so that's like working for a company of some kind, and that can be anything from small business startup to, like a big major company. And obviously big major companies have more established application processes, so that can be good if you don't have a connection. But smaller startups can also be really good, especially like if you know somebody there already. And applying for in-house, it's generally better to have kind of like ties to it in some way, and that could either mean like a personal connection to someone who works there, or just work experience that's relevant to their industry. So I did regulatory work before, I did financial institution work before, so I may not have any ties to something, but that can be valuable in a smaller company that needs some kind of financial regulation work done. Without connections or work experience, they can be pretty difficult to get, and kind of like nonprofits and government work, they are unlikely to hire you straight out from law school. They're going to want you to have some kind of other experience after and between. Not impossible, but it's unlikely. But this is a good way to be better positioned if you do eventually want to go in-house, to build relationships or just have that kind of experience on your resume. A couple of alternatives that some people find themselves doing the summer after 1L year are being a research assistant for a professor, or even kind of like a policy institute or something on campus or at another university. And that is just kind of like doing research for the summer. And it can be really good if you want to go into academia, or if you have an interest area that you want to work on more. So a solid option. And then there are some kind of law adjacent things where you can be working for similar companies, or agencies and stuff that just aren't necessarily the law itself. There are plenty of other options for people, but I'm not really going to go into them because they're usually one-offs, or they're something like smaller firms, smaller businesses and things that are less likely coming from a top law school, or if you don't have a very specific connection, or they're just not going to lead to practicing the law in the long run, like consulting and things like that. So there are just kind of a couple of things to consider when you are doing your 1L summer search. And I would say the main thing is pay. And with that, you have Big Law, which is basically going to pay you at the rate of a first year associate. 2021 going into 2022, you know, like maybe $1,000 or so shy of $40,000 for the summer. On the other end of the spectrum is getting paid nothing. A lot of nonprofits, a lot of government types of things, even with pushes for more minimum wage to not have unpaid interns, even with those kinds of pushes, there are a lot of things that will not pay you. And so that's just a consideration, especially if you're going to an expensive city to do this and you do not budget your financial aid with the expectation that you would make nothing over the summer. It may not be an option. And then there's something of the kind of middle ground where you do get paid. It's nowhere near Big Law, but it's still enough to at least pay for your living expenses, not enough to save, but enough to kind of pay for your life, especially if you have roommates and things like that, and kind of live pretty frugally. Something else to consider with that pay is that a lot of institutions, if you are doing kind of like nonprofit or government work, will give you a stipend up to a certain amount. Stanford definitely does. When I was interning this summer, I was paid, but I was not paid above the amount that allowed for me to get a stipend. So I got paid and I got a little bit of a stipend. And that meant that I had a pretty comfortable summer because I was working remotely. So I just went home and I wasn't paying for housing on campus and I wasn't paying for food or anything because I was at home. I know a lot of like top institutions do have funding for kind of government or PI work. So it may not be that you have to worry about getting paid nothing for the summer. And when you do get that school funding and that kind of, you're doing that public interest work, you usually don't really hit an amount that makes you responsible for taxes. And that can be really great. Like unless you're getting like a scholarship for room and board or something like that, usually like your financial aid isn't considered like taxable income. So if you're making like $10,000 over the summer, you're not going to be really responsible for taxes. I did keep money back just in case something happens that I don't expect, but I'm not really anticipating owing anything. And speaking of taxes, if you do work in-house for a company or Big Law or something that does pay you that much, there will be a substantial amount probably taken out of your paycheck because they're taking it out as if you were going to make not $40,000, but $40,000 times like 5 or 6. So that's something to take into consideration, but that may not be accurate. So even if you're making money, taking into consideration that you might have to pay taxes of some kind, especially if you are getting some kind of other funding that isn't taking taxes out. Another thing to consider that isn't something that you have to worry about if you're only making kind of like the school public interest funding is that if you are getting paid by Big Law and getting paid Big Law money, that can be counted against you in your financial aid. In fact, it usually is for schools like Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. And so the amount that you will owe to the school will be more. And like you can pay that, but usually it's nice to have a kind of cushion. So you may not want to. So you may end up taking out more loans or something. It's something to consider. Like it's up to everybody how they handle it, but you will be responsible for at least a portion of the money that you make over the summer to the school for the next school year. The internship that you have after 1L also has an effect on the approach that you take kind of for the rest of law school to a certain extent. The main way is if you are taking kind of a Big Law route, and in that case, when you go into OCI, if you were doing something law adjacent, or if you were doing something that wasn't at a firm, then you have to make sure that you have good talking points for why you want to go into big law after having done that other route. It's not too bad as long as you're doing something law related, but it is something to understand that when you're, doing a nonprofit type of thing, like how to sell that into why you want to work for that firm. So just make sure that you come away with talking points for interviews. And then there's also the consideration that usually when you do work for a firm as a 1L, barring something catastrophic happening, you will be invited back for the next summer for at least a few weeks, if not the whole summer, if you want to. And so you go into OCI with an offer, and it's just a lot less stressful. I did not. I did have an offer by the time I did go into OCI, but that's another story, and maybe I'll tell it in something more about OCI. But in general, having a 1L internship allows you a little bit more comfort when you're going through on-campus interviews to get your internship for 2L. We did talk a little bit about pay and like taxes and things like that, but it's just worth noting again that what you make that summer as a 1L can have an effect on how you budget for that next year. And so regardless of taxes and things like that, if you do a big law internship, you probably will have more cash for living expenses or emergencies or even just random things that come out for the next year. And now we're going to move on to kind of the approaches you can take to applying for 1L summer internships. And I would say at least from what I've talked to people about, that there are about 4 main approaches. The first is a very focused approach, and that is where you really only have like a handful of internships that you're interested in, and those are the only ones that you apply to. And I would say this is pretty risky. It's a little bit less risky if you have connections and work experience and, really great grades, really great recommendations, where nothing's ever a shoe-in, but you're as close as possible. And it's also somewhat less risky if you go to school where it's pretty much guaranteed that if you don't land something by the time the summer rolls around, that you can probably do like a research assistantship. The second approach is taking kind of like an area of interest focus. And so it's not just applying to like 3 to 5 places so much as focusing on like a subject or an area of law or a practice area or an industry or something that you're sure that you want to go into. This is kind of the approach that I took for applying, and I wouldn't say it's super risky, but it is clunky, and I don't know that I would recommend it for most people. So I just took my area of interest, the area that I kind of want to go into after, kind of like a subject area, an industry, and I applied to related like nonprofit public interest internships, to the related kind of government agencies and committees and things like that, companies and startups that were related, and then firms that have that kind of practice area and industry specifically. It did work out in the end, and the reason that I call it clunky is just because I felt like I was applying all over the place, and I feel like I also might have had a little bit more success earlier on if I'd been focused, but also it worked out. I'll go a little bit more into it when I talk about timelines, but that's just to say it can create a long timeline. It's very spread out, and things kind of just pop up really differently. And I think it only works if you also have kind of experience in that area, because I at least felt like I had a good selling point for why I wanted to do it and why I would be a good fit, which probably gave people more confidence that I was really interested in the area. Another approach is kind of being type focused, and by that I mean you know that you want to do government, agency, something like that, and so you only apply to government, but you apply pretty broadly within that area, or you only apply to firms specifically. And I feel like that works pretty well because you're more open. Like the people that I know, some people did really well applying to big law firms, and like I mentioned, I took a really targeted approach, so I actually didn't apply to that many firms in the end. And from some people I heard that they just applied really broadly to firms, and they only applied to firms, and they applied early, and they felt like that's kind of what made them successful. It also gave them practice in interviewing and getting through screeners and getting through, full rounds of interviews with multiple people. So that is like good. Like you get practice in like telling your narrative and why you're interested in like government work or why you're interested in firm work or yada yada yada. And it kind of gives you, if you're doing firms, it gives you kind of connection to them for the next summer as well when you go through OCI. And then finally, there's just like applying broadly, early, and often. And honestly, if you don't have any kind of experience, you don't have like a specific interest area, and maybe grades aren't great or something like that, it can't hurt to just apply to a lot of places. I'm not saying apply places that you don't actually want to go, but getting your materials ready and just like applying broadly, it can be a really good approach. So with the timeline, some things to consider are that schools for 1Ls have some set timelines. I know Stanford, we weren't really supposed to apply before December 1st. Like we could have like informational conversations, we could talk to career services, get our materials ready, but we weren't really supposed to apply before that. I think people always do, and if you're sure, I'm not going to say not to. I did wait until December 1st for some things that I was the most interested in, but for the most part I didn't feel like it was necessary to get things out that quickly. But if you're really focused on something and you feel like it'll give you an advantage, maybe that's the route to take. And then timelines for different types of internships are so different. And so the scattered approach that I took meant that I was applying for stuff for so long, and like the horizon for hearing back on things were so long. Big law is super early, so I was doing interviews on that end really early and getting those apps out really early. And nonprofits like may open randomly and close pretty quickly. In-house can have their own timeline, and sometimes they may not open until late in the process. And then government is all over the place. I know I had some agencies that opened like a firm December 1st, closed January, and were decided by February or March. And then where I ended up, I had a mix of in-house and government by the time I was making my decision. And I had one agency that I applied to that part of their hiring process was over before I applied, and like I just never seen it, and the other part of it hadn't even started yet. Like they hadn't even started looking at resumes, and I ended up with an offer with that pretty quickly. It turned around really quickly. And then the other kind of government area that I ended up in, I think they posted on a Friday maybe. I saw it over the weekend, applied Sunday night, and then I think before I woke up I got an email offering me to interviewed that next day and got an offer by like the next Monday. And that was just their hiring process. They had that kind of autonomy, and it was super quick, and you could miss it. And then the in-house, I applied randomly, hadn't heard back for a while, and then one day heard back offering an interview in the middle of all my other interviews and offers and things like that. And I don't even think they finished with their process for like another month. And if you really want to go there, which I was interested in, you have to be willing to wait it out and to lose out. So applying in multiple areas can really screw with your timeline, because if you're just waiting on government or in-house, knowing that like most of the things that you want to apply to happen later, you put your applications out and like you won't be applying until March or April, it's less stressful. to just know that that's your timeline. If you're applying for big law and you know that you're just doing this in December and you'll be done by February, that's also less stressful. If you're like me and you don't know what you're doing, or you're applying specifically to an interest area but it's all over the place, like I knew going in that I could be doing this from December to like May or June, and I was doing it from December to April, and it was very stressful. And then one thing to note is that for timelines, late is not necessarily bad, and I mean that for both getting your apps in and hearing back. Like I said, there was one office in an agency that I was applying to that hadn't even started looking at apps. And it was March. So you never know. And then I just want to share a few tips for this process. This is not an exhaustive list. When you're applying to any of these things, tap into personal connections. And I don't just mean people that you know personally, but friends of friends of friends, because sometimes it means that somebody actually looks at your application, whereas maybe they decide quicker in their process and they just never get to you. Also tap into alumni networks, and that's like alumni of organizations that you've been in, your undergrad, and of course the law school that you're at. I definitely did this in my case. I talked to someone who was part of a scholarship program that I was in going into undergrad. I talked to an alumni of Stanford, and it really did help. That's how I found out that one of my apps, like part of it was already done and the other part hadn't even started. So I would not have known that if I hadn't just reached out and asked. If you have prior experience, it's really helpful to lean into that because it is very marketable to people. Going into this process, have your references, your writing sample, your personal statements, and like everything ready to go, because things will move quickly once they get started, even if it's a waiting game for you. And then while being late is fine, go ahead and apply once you're ready. Like I said, I'm not going to give advice on whether like you should ignore university policies or anything like that, but when you're ready and you're sure that this is something that you're interested in, go ahead and do it. Like there was one internship that I was really interested in, but they were done like before Stanford's policy allowed applications, and it was just like oh, that's too bad kind of thing from career services. And I was just like, yeah, that's terrible that we can't apply to someplace because it closed. And like, I don't think anybody would have ever said anything if I'd been successful in getting that internship. Have a good why ready as to why you want to work to someplace, especially if your background is a little bit different. Like if you're going into kind of a corporate setting and you've been doing government, or the opposite. And don't forget like all of the regions, areas of the country and whatnot that you will be marketable in. And by that, I mean, obviously, like you can apply places that are where your school is at. You can apply to major markets, but you can also apply if you went to undergrad in a different region, or if you're from a different region of the country or of the world. Okay, a little summary for this. Overall, there are no bad choices, and I don't think that I would change anything about my process because I did really enjoy where I ended up, but it was a very stressful approach. And if you are risk averse, I would say it's not the most risky approach, but it's on the riskier side of things, because like if you decide to just apply to like big law, like there's a second wave of nonprofit and government things that happen after that process is over. But yeah, in retrospect, I was always fine and you will be too. So with that, I've shared as much wisdom as I can, and if you are a law student applying, good luck. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.